Volunteers, good morning. Let me open my presentation by thanking the organizers for giving me the opportunity to deliver a presentation of Czech Blind United about challenges for rescue services in this country and everywhere in Europe, I believe, or in advanced countries. Now, I believe that it's necessary to open my speech by telling you in a few words who Czech Blind United are. We are not a football club, even though we sound like that. But we are a civic group of blind people in this country, the only representative civic group in this country of blind people, having some almost 10,000 members. For such a small country, it's quite a lot. And we basically have twofold mission. The first mission is to socialize, simply to put people together, to sit around tables, to drink coffee, to talk about problems of blind people, to sort of find the ways how to improve our lives. And the second mission is, of course, to provide services, which basically we do through our subsidiary companies, which some of you may have had the opportunity to be introduced to at your June workshop. It's Tiflo Centers and Tiflo Service. These are the companies that provide services for blind people all over the country. Now, the title of my speech is Blindness a Challenge for Rescue Services? Now, of course, at first hearing, for everybody it is. And why is that so? To answer the question, I have to sort of turn to a bigger brother, and that bigger brother is an American organization of blind people called National Federation of the Blind. They are quite active in the United States, and they always sort of try to put the things into their right order and to find the crux, the gist of everything. And one of their quotes says, and that's important for our presentation today, I quote, "The real problem of blindness is not the loss of eyesight. The real problem is the misunderstanding and lack of information." And that's really the crux of the thing, the gist of the thing. Because people simply may not be acquainted with how blind people communicate, with what blind people actually perceive and what they don't perceive. And it doesn't only concern people who are totally blind. It also concerns people who are partially sighted or low vision, so-called. That is, people with residual vision who can see their bearings. They can see around the room here, as my assistant here, who is a low vision person, but who may not be able to see, well, let's say 10 or 20 meters in front of them. Okay, so they are in a disadvantaged position, even though nobody else around them knows about it. So that's why we need to change this lack of information, and we need to explain, and to explain. That's also one of our missions. Now, I believe we should start from barriers, because physical barriers are usually something else than what blind people perceive as barriers. So physical barriers actually are not barriers for the blind, which sounds strange. I can give you, again, an illustrative example. What are suitable environments for blind people? Suitable environments are corridors, for instance, in old buildings, right? I can give you examples from my own professional work. Corridors in Ministry of Foreign Affairs in this country, which is an old building, or Ministry of Environment, which is a fairly old building, or Ministry of Local and Regional Development, which is a very old building. So corridors there are very good orientation points, because a blind person can get very easily along a relatively narrow space. Recesses or wall projections are again orientation signals for blind people, because they can, with their white cane, very easily recognize, yes, here is a projection with the door, which is the door of my study. Let's look at people, we have here people from Caroline University, and they know intimately Faculty of Arts building at Náměstí Jana Palacha, where recesses are used for the doors. So it's quite easy for a student, blind student or blind worker at the university to recognize where he should go, right? Now, alternating surfaces are also very good signal. When you have carpeted surface, then you have some sort of paving, then you have some sort of small projections on the floor, and of course, what is in terms of rescue workers quite important is unchanged environments. Let's imagine the situation of sort of big bulk evacuation in Prague, when you use underground system, metro, in this country. Metro provides quite unchanged environment for many, many years. So blind people who use this transportation system are quite acquainted with metro stations, and they can move around very, very easily and with certainty, even under very extreme conditions, when there's darkness, for instance, because they don't need any light. So they can very easily move in those corridors because they know where to go and how to go, and they could move very fast. Well, it, for instance, could be again illustrated by an example from my family, because when, for instance, lights are not working in a house, which sometimes happens, well, I'm the only person in the family who can lead my children or my wife downstairs or upstairs, because it's quite easy for me. It's the same as when the lights are on, right? So that metro could be very easily used, and people who are rescuing other people may use blind people as guides, of course, in these extreme situations. Now, what are, on the other hand, true barriers are what physically is not regarded as barriers. True barriers are, for instance, expansive spaces or carpeted spaces. Again, an illustration. When you enter the entrance hall of Radlická CSOB headquarters, well, it's a big hall where the paving is the same all over the place. So for me, it's quite difficult to find my way from the revolving doors to the reception desk, because, well, there's no signal. You cannot find any sort of line which would lead you there. So these expansive spaces are very tricky, or carpeted spaces that you can find in international hotels like Hilton or Sheraton or Marriott or whatever, right? So another such example is, let's say, snow. When you have snowy surfaces here in the city, in, let's say, housing estates, it's quite difficult for a blind person to orientate himself or herself, because snow is the same everywhere, and there's no audible signal which can tell you, you're approaching a tree, for instance. It's quite difficult. And from the standpoint of rescue workers, again, it's noise. When rescue work is going on in, again, some extreme circumstances, such as, I don't know, fire or floods, where you use big motors, big engines for aggregates or for generating electricity because there's no electricity around, then of course that noise may make that blind person very uncertain, and in that case you as rescue worker should take into consideration this fact, and you should of course try and lead that blind person away, because noise makes him or her very uncertain indeed. Now let's move on to the communication media for the blind. Of course, they are auditive media. Even low vision people, even people with residual vision cannot use properly signals which are given in a sort of visual way. So public address systems in villages and towns are important. People should hear whatever instructions they may be given. Okay, then of course SMS messages, and that system now works very well. Blind people, as sighted people, all have mobile telephones. Even people who are socially disadvantaged have them, and they have speech output, so they can read the messages by listening to whatever that message tells them. Right, and of course radio is also important. Let's forget about television, because television is sort of audio-visual medium, and at times it's quite stupid when it says, now, for instance, dial the number you can see on the screen. Okay, so that doesn't help very much, even though it is quite easy for television announcers to read that number, but they have their orders, their instructions. They don't usually do so, but it's our own task to try and persuade them that they should be doing that. Let's say in the United States, this doesn't happen really, because they have a different culture. Now, I believe it's also necessary to stress something which you already mentioned at your seminar, at your workshop, which was held in June, but it's necessary to repeat that again and again. How to communicate when something happens. Remember that there's, as usual, no eye contact between a blind person and a rescue worker, which means that rescue worker looks at that blind person, but that blind person may not respond with their eye contact. Okay, so the first thing that rescue workers should do, and I believe even medical workers actually do it when they come to rescue somebody with heart attack or something, they start talking with that person, and it's well, essential that you should start talking to a blind person, not just picking, taking his arm or something and leading him somewhere, because then that person might be uncertain. And it does not necessarily concern only old people. It concerns everybody. Simply you start talking to him, I'm so-and-so, I've come to rescue you, we are going to go out of the building or something like that, depending on the situation. So remember, no eye contact is necessary. I can again give you an example which illustrates that it works like that. When, for instance, I'm riding in our car and the GPS system fails, which happens very often, then of course you need to ask people where and how to get somewhere. We pull up. I put down the electric window and ask a person who is walking past the car. 100% cases tell that they never respond because they don't have eye contact. It must be my wife, a driver, or my children who ask that person, and only then that person responds. And it's not his fault, it's just because there's no eye contact and he simply doesn't know that I'm speaking to him. Okay, so that's important, that you simply don't expect eye contact. There's no eye contact. Even with people like my assistant here, again, his eye contact can work for 2 meters, but not for 5 meters, okay? Now, I would like also to mention a bit of, do I still have some time?
2 minutes.
Very good.
4 minutes.
4 minutes. I'll try to be as fast as possible, all right. Your first workshop, I believe that you were talking there about an interesting database of the disabled, which would help rescue workers find them and rescue them more efficiently. Now, of course, people think with this in a sort of apprehension, and I ask a question, big brother or not big brother? And my answer is as follows: I want to survive. So let's forget about that paranoia. And anyway, if you are once in one single computer in the world that is connected to the internet, now you are on the internet whether you like it or not, I can bet on it. It simply works like that, even though you don't want it, you don't like it. It simply works like that, you see. So, right, that paranoia is very damaging. I believe such a database should be created. Such a database should be administered. And what we have in Czech Blind United is database of our membership. Of course, we also have some scattered databases unconnected, such as Tiflo service databases, Tiflo centers databases, internet conferences of blind people, that is not only membership of Czech Blind United, but other blind people, magazine subscribers databases, and there are, of course, databases of insurance, health insurance companies. All these databases are not interconnected, and people are unwilling to interconnect them, but we should at least start working on this and to try and find some solution. We, as Czech Blind United, are willing to manage such a central and updatable database. Of course, it needs to be paid by somebody, so it should be paid either by the government or by the European Union. I don't know what will happen, but in future years, it might be very useful to work on this project of creating a central database. I'm not talking about the disabled as a group, because I'm not entitled to speak for other disabilities, but as far as blind people are concerned, I believe we would be able to work on the databases. I believe that your trainings and videos and hands-on demonstrations are very important, but remember, they are meant for professionals, for rescue workers, volunteer rescue workers, not for blind people. When you show a video to a blind person, it doesn't make sense, of course, right? And I would like to finish with two illustrative stories. One is about 9/11, and the other one is about myself when flying from Oslo to Copenhagen. Well, in the United States, there was a big disaster on the 11th of September 2001, and of course, a blind person was televised whom his dog led out of one of the towers. It's sort of a very impressive story, very moving story about how a dog saved his master. Well, I believe it's the other way around, because the master thinks for the dog and the dog only uses his eyes. So the master gave the orders, and it was, of course, the master who saved himself, using, of course, his very useful tool, and it was his dog. So that moving story is not that moving, it's just common sense. And the second story concerns my flight from Oslo to Copenhagen. I was once flying, it was in the evening, with Scandinavian airline system, and I was sitting in the last row in an aisle seat. And when the crew were providing emergency procedures, showing us what to do, suddenly a stewardess came up to me and led me out of the aisle seat to the door of the plane. And she showed me how to open the door and how to close it. And then she told me, do it yourself. And I opened the door, closed it. Now I know how to open the door of the planes or big aircraft. And then she took me back to my seat, and I was wondering, and asked her why she actually had shown me that. And she said, well, should there be darkness all over around here, you would be the only person who knows his way around the plane, which was quite logical. So I was very happy. Fortunately, nothing happened, so I didn't need to use my skill, right? So I again finish my presentation with my question whether blindness is a challenge for rescue services. I believe it is not if we use common sense and available technology. Thank you very much, and I'm waiting for your question if there are questions, should there be any. Thank you.